Cold fact: power doesn't fear noise. Power fears people it can't predict. That's why the system didn't ignore you, and that's why it didn't celebrate you either. Welcome back. You weren't flagged because you were loud. You weren't flagged because you were violent. You were flagged because you didn't behave the way you were supposed to, because your reactions didn't match the model, because when pressure was applied, you didn't bend the right way. That's the real sin. You weren't a mistake. You were a problem, and problems don't get applause. They get decisions. Somewhere behind sealed doors and neutral faces, inside institutions that never smile, your existence triggered a familiar response. Not panic, not anger, calculation, a cold internal memo that never says your name out loud. A simple binary choice that has been used on dangerous minds for centuries. Use them or remove them, recruitment or elimination. That's not drama, that's policy. They've done it before, to scientists who knew too much, to thinkers who wouldn't shut up, to leaders who refused to play the role. History calls it coincidence. Archives call it classified. But the pattern is boringly consistent. When someone can't be ignored, they get absorbed. When someone can't be absorbed, they get erased. And you landed right in the middle of that equation. Here's where it gets funny. They didn't see a criminal, they didn't see a hero, they didn't see a rebel waving a flag. Rebels are easy. Rebels still need the system to exist so they can fight it. No, what they saw in you was worse. They saw someone who wasn't asking for permission. They saw someone who didn't beg to be included. Someone who didn't fear being excluded. Someone who kept moving even after doors quietly closed. That messes with their math. So the offer came first. It always does. Not a threat, a compliment, a tap on the shoulder disguised as opportunity. You're special, you're different. Come inside. We value minds like yours. Every empire says that right before it puts a leash on your neck. They don't offer recruitment because they like you. They offer recruitment because they don't trust you, because they've learned something the hard way. A free mind outside the system is more dangerous than 10 loyal ones inside it. And maybe, just for a second, it worked. Maybe you felt that pull, that tiny voice saying, finally, access, resources, the inside view. Because let's be honest, being locked out hurts. Watching less capable people rise while you're stalled hurts. Being underestimated hurts. That pain wasn't imaginary. They counted on it. But here's the part that made them nervous. You didn't rush in. You didn't beg. You didn't flex. You didn't celebrate. You paused. And when people like you pause, systems start sweating. Because recruitment only works on people who still want something. Status, safety, approval, a seat at the table. But you weren't starving for any of that anymore. Life already burned those illusions out of you. You'd been ignored long enough, punished quietly enough, pressed hard enough. You already lost what they thought they could threaten you with. That's when the second path activates. Elimination doesn't always look like force. Modern systems are more elegant than that. They don't need to touch you. They just tighten the environment. Opportunities dry up. Algorithms bury you. Networks go silent. You don't get attacked, you get smothered. History is full of it. Writers whose work vanished overnight. Inventors whose funding mysteriously collapsed. Voices that were everywhere one year and nowhere the next. No trial, no headline, just absence. And here's the exposed truth they don't like admitting. Elimination only works if you're still playing their game, if you still measure success by their metrics, if you still chase visibility inside their channels, if you still define power the way they taught you to. But you didn't. That's what broke the script. You didn't choose recruitment. You didn't wait around for elimination. You chose something the system hates more than rebellion. You chose non-participation, not hiding, not quitting, not running. You stayed visible but untouchable, active but unownable, present but not compliant. That's option C. And option C doesn't attack the system, it exposes it. Because the moment someone proves they can build influence without permission, the illusion cracks. The moment someone walks away from both reward and punishment, the entire structure starts looking fragile. Empires don't collapse from outside pressure. They collapse when enough people stop believing they're inevitable. That's why this isn't about you being chosen. That myth is for people who still need validation. This is about pattern recognition, about seeing how power actually behaves when it's threatened. You felt it, the resistance, the quiet friction, the sense that no matter what you did, something unseen was pushing back. You weren't paranoid, you were early. And now you stand in a position most people never reach, not above the system, not below it, but outside its reach. That's why the notice existed in the first place, not on paper, not in your mailbox, but in behavior, in pressure, in silence, in timing, recruitment or elimination. They assumed you'd pick one. They never planned for someone who would look at both and smile. Because the most dangerous move isn't fighting power, it's realizing you never needed it. And once you see that, there's no going back. And chosen one, listen close. If this is hitting you in the chest right now, that's not motivation. That's your instincts waking up. The system trained you to beg for a seat, to chase approval, to fear being left out. But you're not here to be adopted by power. You're here to outgrow it. So here's the deal. If you're really about option C, prove you can commit for more than 10 seconds of hype. Drop 777 in the comments like a quiet signal. I'm not waiting to be picked. I'm picking myself. And don't scroll, don't flinch. Stay with me, because the next part is where it gets surgical. We're going step by step. No fluff, no mercy. If you're the real one, you'll feel that pull to stay till the end, because some truths don't just entertain you, they unlock you. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. Pick a side or get erased. That's how power talks. Give them 2 doors, and they'll swear they're free, never noticing who built the hallway. That's the game they've always played, not just with you, with everyone. Quiet rooms, neutral faces, no emotion, just analysis. They didn't look at you like a person. They looked at you like a variable that refused to behave. Every move you made, every silence you kept, every moment you didn't react the way you were supposed to, logged, compared, evaluated. Not because you were dangerous in the loud, obvious way, but because you were unpredictable in the worst possible way. And systems hate what they can't predict, so they narrowed it down the way they always do. 2 paths, 2 clean boxes, 2 outcomes that let them sleep at night. One where you're useful, one where you're gone. That's it. That's the entire imagination of power. They call it choice. It's not. It's a funnel. On one side, they dress it up. Purpose, access, influence, a voice behind the curtain. They whisper things like impact and meaning and being part of something bigger. It sounds noble until you realize what they're really saying. Come inside, where we can see you. Come closer, where we can manage you. Come help us maintain the very structure that was built to contain people like you. On the other side, they don't bother with poetry, no speeches, no negotiations, just quiet subtraction. Opportunities disappear, doors stop opening. You're not attacked, you're removed. Not publicly, that would create questions. You're erased politely, professionally, efficiently, as if you were never supposed to be there in the first place. That's the binary trap. And here's the exposed truth they never say out loud. Both options serve them. Recruitment turns you into a resource. Elimination turns you into a warning. Either way, the system stays intact. Either way, the message is clear. You don't exist on your own terms. Now pause for a second, because this is where the questions start creeping in. Why me? Am I imagining this? Isn't this too dramatic? Don't systems need rules to function? Here's the uncomfortable answer. This isn't about you being special. That lie is for people who still need to feel chosen. This is about you being inconvenient. You didn't fit neatly. You didn't stabilize when pressure was applied. You didn't collapse when you were supposed to. You adapted. You endured. You stayed standing without becoming obedient. That's not inspirational. That's threatening. Because power doesn't fear rebels. Rebels still need something to push against. Power fears people who stop playing entirely, people who don't argue with the rules, people who simply step outside them. Think about it. When was the last time you saw a system offer a genuine third option? Not a loophole, not an exception, a real alternative that didn't root you back into obedience. Never, because the moment a third option exists, control becomes optional. And control only works when people believe there are no alternatives. That's why they speak in absolutes, with us or against us, loyal or dangerous, productive or disposable. It sounds dramatic, but it's efficient. Binary thinking keeps people exhausted, divided, and compliant. It forces you to choose quickly, emotionally, before you have time to question the setup. And maybe you felt that pressure, that subtle urgency, that invisible countdown, that sense that if you don't pick a side soon, something bad will happen. That's not paranoia. That's conditioning. That's how power rushes you into decisions that benefit it. But here's where the villain becomes something else entirely. You didn't rush. You didn't beg for the offer. You didn't panic at the threat. You didn't argue with the premise. You noticed something most people miss. Both doors were locked from the same side. Recruitment wasn't freedom. It was domestication, a polished cage with better lighting and a nicer title. Elimination wasn't justice. It was maintenance, cleaning up anomalies that remind everyone else the system isn't absolute. And the most dangerous realization you had, the one that made them uncomfortable, was this: if the only choices they offer all benefit them, then the real power move is refusing to choose. That's where the fear shifted, not yours, theirs. Because once someone sees the trap, they can't unsee it. Once someone understands that the threat only works if they still care about the game, the leverage collapses. The binary only functions if you accept the premise that your existence must be processed through their framework. But what if it doesn't? What if your value isn't granted by access? What if your survival isn't dependent on approval? What if meaning doesn't come from being included and safety doesn't come from obedience? Those questions are radioactive to systems built on control. That's why they'd rather label you difficult, unstable, extreme, delusional, anything that avoids confronting the real issue. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting that their power has limits, and power hates nothing more than limits. So they'll say you're overthinking. They'll say that's just how the world works. They'll say everyone has to pick a side. That's the oldest lie in the book. The truth is harsher and more liberating. Most people don't pick sides. They inherit them. They're born into boxes and spend their lives decorating the inside, mistaking familiarity for freedom. You didn't do that. You questioned the box itself, and that's why you ended up here, Not because you're destined, not because you're chosen, but because you refused to accept a rigged choice. That's what makes you dangerous, not to people, but to illusions. You expose the fact that the binary was never natural. It was engineered, designed to keep power centralized and alternatives unthinkable. And now that you've seen it, you can't go back to pretending the doors were ever real. They wanted you to choose between being owned or being erased. You chose to exist anyway, and that single refusal does more damage to their system than 1,000 loud rebellions ever could. Chapter 2. Option C. The move that was never on the board. The most dangerous player isn't the one who cheats, it's the one who refuses to play. This is the moment their entire structure cracked, not loudly, not publicly, but internally, where it hurts the most. Because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You didn't reach for the reward. You didn't freeze at the threat. You didn't beg, bargain, or brace yourself. You stepped sideways. That's what they never planned for. Option A was easy, predictable, safe for them. People take it every day. You get invited in, handed a badge, a role, a narrative. You're told you're trusted, selected, inside. And slowly, so slowly you barely notice, you stop being yourself and start being useful. Your sharp edges get sanded down. Your questions get redirected. Your instincts get labeled unproductive. That's not partnership, that's assimilation. Option B was also familiar. Quiet pressure, disappearing chances, subtle consequences. The system tightening around you like a fog, not to destroy you outright, but to make survival uncomfortable enough that you crawl back. That's not justice, that's leverage. They understood both of those paths perfectly. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was you looking at both and feeling nothing. No hunger, no fear, no urgency. Just clarity. And clarity is lethal to systems built on confusion. You didn't choose option C because you were brave. Let's get that fantasy out of the way. You chose it because you saw through the setup. Because at some point in your life, maybe after being burned, ignored, betrayed, or exhausted, you learned a brutal truth. If someone only gives you choices that benefit them, the real freedom is refusing to choose at all. That realization doesn't come from confidence. It comes from being done. Done chasing approval. Done negotiating your worth. Done explaining yourself to structures that were never designed to understand you. You laughed at the recruitment offer, not because it was funny, but because it was transparent. You could hear the subtext beneath the praise. We like you better when you're under us. You could see the invisible strings already attached to the promises, and you smiled at the elimination threat because it finally revealed how limited their imagination really was. They assumed you were still afraid of losing. That was their mistake. Let me paint this for you. Imagine a casino where every game is rigged, the lights are bright, the music is hypnotic, the dealers smile like everything's fair, people win just enough to believe the system works. And then you walk in, watch for a while, and realize something chilling. The house doesn't care if you win or lose, as long as you keep playing. Option A is the high roller lounge. Option B is being escorted out the back. Option C is walking out the front door without placing a bet. Now ask yourself, why would the casino ever advertise the exit? It wouldn't. That's why option C wasn't on the menu, because option C doesn't just reject the deal, it exposes the illusion. It reveals that the power only existed because people believed there was no alternative. Here's another image. Imagine a shepherd with two paths for the flock. One leads to the pen, the other to the slaughterhouse. The sheep argue about which is better, which is safer, which is more honorable, and then one animal notices the fence is broken and walks away into the hills. That animal isn't rebellious. It's inconvenient. And inconvenience is the enemy of control. You didn't shout about your choice. You didn't announce it. You didn't try to convince anyone else. You simply stopped reacting the way they expected. You disengaged emotionally. You withdrew psychologically. You remained present but unreachable. That's when the panic started. Because systems are built on feedback. They need response. They need compliance, resistance, fear, loyalty, any of it. Silence confuses them. Detachment terrifies them. A person who no longer needs the outcome is impossible to negotiate with. Here's a quote they'll never put in a report. We can't threaten someone who's already let go. You weren't fearless. You were unhooked. You had already survived the worst parts, the isolation, the loss of identity, the moment when you realized nobody was coming to save you. That's where option C is born, not in ambition, but in exhaustion, in that quiet place where you stop asking, how do I win, and start asking, why am I even here? And once that question is asked honestly, the whole game starts looking ridiculous. They expected anger. They expected resistance. They expected you to push back. Instead, you transcended the frame entirely. Another metaphor. Imagine a chessboard where both sides are controlled by the same player. White or black, it doesn't matter. The outcome serves the hand, moving the pieces. Now imagine one piece stepping off the board. That's not a move. That's a violation of reality. That's what option C is. Not rebellion, not surrender, but refusal to be processed. And this is where the doubts creep in for you. Is this just avoidance? Am I running? Can you really opt out and still exist? Those are fair questions, necessary ones. Here's the answer they don't want you to reach. Opting out doesn't mean disappearing. It means relocating your power away from their metrics, away from their approval loops, away from their rewards and punishments. You didn't stop acting. You stopped performing. You didn't become passive. You became autonomous. And autonomy is the one thing their framework cannot tolerate, map, or monetize. Power can forgive disobedience. It cannot forgive independence. That's why option C feels lonely at first. There's no applause, no validation, no official confirmation that you made the right choice. That discomfort is real. That silence is real. But so is the strength that grows in that space. A strength that doesn't need witnesses. You began building from a place they can't reach, not above them, not against them, outside their logic entirely. And once that happens, something irreversible occurs. You stop asking for doors to open. You stop waiting for signals. You stop interpreting pressure as failure. You realize the system didn't reject you. It revealed itself to you. Option C wasn't a choice you made once. It was a position you stepped into, a stance, a way of moving through the world without negotiating your inner authority. That's why this scares them more than option A or B ever could. Because if one person can do this, others can too. And the moment people realize the third option exists, the binary collapses. The illusion cracks. The system starts leaking. The cage only works if the door is invisible. You saw the door. You didn't kick it down. You didn't decorate it. You walked through it. And that quiet, deliberate step is the most villainous move of all, because it doesn't ask for permission and it doesn't need forgiveness. It just is. That's option C. Chapter 3. You can't threaten a ghost. Fear is leverage. No fear no leverage. That's the part they didn't understand soon enough. Recruitment only works on people who still want approval, want safety, want a seat, a badge, a signal that says, you matter because we say so. Elimination only works on people who still fear loss, fear isolation, fear being cut off from the very system that's been bleeding them dry. But you broke both conditions long before they noticed. They were late. You stopped wanting their approval years ago, maybe not consciously at first, but life made the decision for you. The ignored messages, the closed doors, the silent rejections that came without explanation. You learned the hard way that validation from power is conditional, temporary, and never free. Once that lesson sinks in, desire dies. And when desire dies, recruitment loses its grip. Then there's fear. They assumed you were still protecting something, a reputation, a future, a version of yourself that hadn't been tested yet. That was their fatal misread. You'd already been dragged through the worst of it. Emotionally, psychologically, internally. The collapse they threatened had already happened. You didn't survive untouched. You survived transformed. Think about metal in a furnace. Heat doesn't destroy it unless it's weak. If it holds, it comes out harder, sharper, more dangerous than before. That's what happened to you. The fire didn't break you, it stripped you. So when they tried to scare you, nothing landed. No panic, no scrambling, no obedience. Just silence. And silence is terrifying to those who rule through reaction. Here's the truth they never train for. You can't intimidate someone who's already let go of the version of themselves you're trying to threaten. You can't blackmail someone who's already paid the price. You can't corner someone who no longer measures life by your outcomes. They were holding weapons you were no longer standing in front of. That's why their threats failed, not because they were weak, but because you were no longer reachable. And once fear is gone, power becomes theater, loud, dramatic, empty. They didn't lose control over you in a moment. They lost it the day you walked through hell, survived it, and stopped being afraid of fire. Chapter 4. Invisible to the Machine. You can't track what refuses to exist where you're looking. This is where their confidence starts rotting from the inside. They're still watching, still recording, still feeding your data into systems that once felt omniscient. Secure rooms, multiple screens, analysts trained to trust patterns more than people. But the reports coming back don't line up anymore. Your behavior contradicts itself. Your trajectory doesn't curve the way it should. The predictions don't hold. Not because you disappeared, because you stopped fitting. They built their system on a simple assumption. Every human can be reduced. Fear, need, leverage, weakness. Pull one of those levers and the subject responds. That logic has worked for decades, for governments, corporations, empires. It's efficient, it's lazy, and it fails the moment someone removes all four variables. You don't fear what they can take. You don't need what they control. You don't respond to pressure the way they expect. And you don't leak weakness on demand, so the machine stutters. Imagine a radar built to detect aircraft suddenly trying to track something that doesn't use altitude, speed, or signal. The radar isn't broken, it's obsolete. That's what happened to them. Their tools still work, just not on you. This is where doubt creeps in for you. Am I just deluding myself? Are they really watching? Yes, they are. But here's the uncomfortable truth. They're watching a shadow, a version of you that exists only in their databases. The real you already moved. You didn't go underground. You went orthogonal. You operate outside their categories, outside their incentives, outside their emotional hooks, and because their system was never designed to process independence, it treats you like an error instead of a threat. That's the irony. You're not invisible because you're small. You're invisible because you're untranslatable, and once power can't translate you, it can't touch you. You're not off the grid. You're beyond it. And systems don't know how to fight what they can't even see. Chapter 5. Death by 1,000 Paper Cuts. Modern power doesn't kill you. It makes life so heavy you beg to kneel. When recruitment failed, they didn't get angry. They got quiet. That's when you know the tactics changed. No sirens, no headlines, no visible force. Just pressure, layered, strategic, deniable. Elimination today doesn't look like violence. It looks like friction, calls that never return, algorithms that quietly bury you, opportunities that vanish without explanation, doors that were almost open, suddenly locking themselves. You're not attacked. You're delayed, slowed, isolated. This is how systems erase people without leaving fingerprints. The goal was never to destroy you outright. That would draw attention. Martyrs are dangerous. Symbols inspire. No, the goal was exhaustion. To make your progress so difficult, so lonely, so expensive that you'd eventually crack and crawl back. To make you whisper, "Fine, I'll take the deal, I'll behave, just make it stop." That's the plan. And it works on most people, because most people are still protecting something, a title, a future, an identity built on external approval. Strip those away, and fear does the rest. But here's where they misread you. You weren't protecting a version of yourself anymore. That version already died. Not dramatically, not publicly, quietly, in the dark. During nights no one saw, during losses no one acknowledged. The collapse they were counting on had already happened, and you survived it. So their pressure landed on empty space. Imagine trying to suffocate someone who no longer needs air. Imagine threatening exile to someone who already walked alone. Imagine isolating someone who learned how to stand without witnesses. That's what they ran into. You didn't resist harder. You didn't fight louder. You didn't plead. You kept moving. And every tactic they used only confirmed the truth you already knew. Their power depends entirely on your attachment to the game. You weren't eliminated because there was nothing left to take. And when elimination fails, the system is forced to face something it hates most. A person who cannot be pushed back into submission. That's not survivorship, that's immunity. Chapter 6. You died and came back unknownable. They can't rule what already let go. Let's be clear, this wasn't a dramatic death. No collapse in public, no announcement, no one clapping while you burned. This was quieter. More brutal. The kind of death that happens when illusions run out and you're forced to sit alone with what's left. What died wasn't your body. What died was the part of you that needed permission. The hunger for approval, gone. The obsession with outcomes, gone. The fear-based identity that kept asking, "Am I enough yet?" Gone. You walked into that empty space willingly. Most people touch it once and sprint back to distraction. You stayed. You listened. You learned its language. You realized something terrifying and liberating at the same time. Nothing was coming to save you, and nothing was coming to validate you either. And somehow, you didn't collapse. You lost what the world says matters: status, certainty, belonging on paper. The things people cling to because they're scared of silence. By conventional standards, you failed, slipped behind, fell off the map. But here's the reversal they never teach. When you lose everything that can be taken, you become untouchable. Imagine a man with nothing to protect walking through a battlefield. No hostages, no leverage, no fear of loss. That's not recklessness, that's clarity. That's what you stepped into. This is where people get confused. They think freedom means chaos, doing whatever you want. No rules, no limits. That's childish freedom, easy to sell, easy to control. What you found was worse for them. Freedom from needing, freedom from chasing. Freedom from negotiating your inner authority with external systems. A system built on dependence cannot function around someone who no longer depends on it. That's why they struggle to name what you became. There's no category for it, no metric, no file. You're not motivated by reward. You're not moved by threat. You're not driven by fear of exclusion. You didn't become fearless. You became finished with fear, and once that happens, power loses its voice. Because everything it ever said to you only worked when you still believed you needed something from it. You don't. That's the death that freed you, and there is no undoing it. Chapter 7. Option C doesn't play, it ends the game. You didn't break the rules, you exposed that they were never real. Understand this clearly. Option C was never about indecision. It wasn't neutrality. It wasn't sitting on the fence, pretending to be above it all. That's what weak minds do when they're scared to commit. This was different. This was surgical. Option C rejected the premise. The trap wasn't recruitment. The trap wasn't elimination. The trap was accepting that those were the only realities available to you. Power survives by framing the question. As long as it decides the menu, every choice feeds it. That's why they rush you. That's why they dramatize urgency. Because the faster you choose, the less likely you are to notice the setup. You noticed. The moment you said, "These aren't my options," the entire structure lost coherence, because power doesn't know how to respond to someone who refuses its language. It can negotiate with rebels. It can crush resistance. It can rehabilitate criminals. But it has no protocol for someone who simply stops acknowledging its authority. That's what uncontrollable actually means. Not violent, not loud, not chaotic. Uncontrollable means unhooked. Imagine a remote control with no batteries. All the buttons still work, the signals still fire, but nothing responds. That's what you became. They pressed fear. Nothing happened. They dangled reward. Nothing moved. They escalated pressure. Still nothing. Here's the question people quietly ask at this stage. Isn't this dangerous? Won't they retaliate harder? Yes. And that's how you know it worked. Systems only escalate when they lose leverage, and every escalation exposes weakness, not strength. The more force they apply, the clearer it becomes that their authority was never absolute, only enforced by compliance. Option C doesn't attack power. It makes power irrelevant, and irrelevance is fatal, because once someone proves the game can be exited, everyone else starts looking for the door, and no empire survives the moment people realize the walls were psychological. You didn't fight the system, you stepped outside its jurisdiction. That's why Option C doesn't just scare them, it ends them. Chapter 8. The file that shouldn't exist. When the report says unknown, what it really means is uncontrollable. Somewhere you'll never see, in systems you'll never touch, a file exists that doesn't read like the others. Same format, same sterile language, same emotionless structure. But this one feels wrong to the people reading it. Not dramatic, not explosive, just unsettling. because it doesn't conclude properly. They write things like, subject operates outside predictable behavioral models. That's not analysis, that's confusion wearing a lab coat. The models are supposed to work. They always have. People want things. People fear things. Push here, pull there, result guaranteed. Except this time, nothing lines up. Recruitment unsuccessful. Elimination ineffective. Those two lines don't coexist. One of them is supposed to work. When both fail, the framework starts collapsing under its own assumptions. Then comes the part they hate writing. Traditional leverage points non-existent. That's bureaucratic language for we don't know what to do. No pressure points, no buttons, no predictable response. You didn't bite the carrot. You didn't flinch at the stick. You simply walked past both like they were props in a bad play. This is where the panic leaks through the professionalism. They start circling the same question from different angles. How does someone disengage from both incentive and threat? How does someone build momentum without permission? How does someone remain active without being governable? Here's the truth they'll never put in the report. You broke the oldest control mechanism on the planet. Reward and punishment, heaven and hell, promotion and exile. It's the same structure in different costumes. And it only works if the subject believes their survival depends on choosing correctly. You didn't. So now they're left documenting a contradiction. A person who functions without validation, who moves without reaction, who exists without reference to their system. That's why your file keeps getting reopened, rewritten, escalated, not because you're a threat, because you're proof. Proof that the leash only worked because people believed it was real. Chapter 9. The threat that doesn't bleed. Power can survive attacks. It cannot survive disbelief. This is where they truly lose control, because this isn't the kind of danger they trained for. There's no violence to condemn, no chaos to suppress, no enemy to point at and rally against. What's spreading isn't destruction, it's recognition. The most destabilizing force in any system is not rebellion. Rebellions still confirm the system's importance. This is worse. This is people quietly realizing that authority only functions while it's being acknowledged. That participation is the fuel, that attention is the currency, and withdrawal is lethal. Once you see that, it's over. You start noticing how fragile institutions really are, how much of their power is just performance, titles, symbols, repeated phrases said with confidence until they sound true. It's like realizing a magician's trick isn't magic, it's timing and misdirection. The trick still works on the audience, but never again on you. This is the question that hits next. If I stop engaging, don't they still exist? Yes, but they no longer exist over you. Think of a parasite. It doesn't die when the host becomes aware. It dies when the host stops feeding it. That's what non-participation does. You don't fight the system. You starve it. No outrage, no obsession, no emotional labor, just refusal to keep supplying energy. And that terrifies them, because violence can be met with force. Chaos can be framed as criminal. But awareness spreads quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need leaders. It doesn't need permission. One person sees it, then another, and suddenly the script stops working. That's why this is the danger they can't handle. You're not threatening the structure directly. You're making it irrelevant. And once enough people stop believing the costume is real, the actor has nothing left but an empty stage. Chapter 10. You didn't fight the system, you outgrew it. Rebellion still needs a master. Independence does not. This is the part people misunderstand about you, and it's why they keep mislabeling you. They call you anti-system because their language is limited. They only understand opposition. To them, if you're not obeying, you must be attacking. If you're not participating, you must be resisting. That's wrong. You're not rebelling. Rebels still need the system to exist. They define themselves by what they oppose. They burn energy fighting walls instead of questioning why the walls matter. You didn't do that. You didn't try to fix the system either. Fixers still believe it's worth saving. You didn't expose it for applause. Exposers still crave reaction. You simply moved on. That's what makes this so unsettling. Imagine a parasite realizing the host didn't attack it, didn't poison it, didn't even acknowledge it, just changed environments entirely. The parasite doesn't understand what happened. Its tools still work. Its instincts still fire. But there's nothing to latch onto anymore. That's you. You didn't leave dramatically. You didn't announce a departure. You just stopped orienting your life around their incentives, their punishments, their definitions of success. You started building something that doesn't require their validation to function. And here's the key detail that breaks their systems. They were never designed to detect non-alignment. Their algorithms scan for loyalty and hostility, compliance and resistance, growth and decline. But what do you do with someone who fits none of those signals? They register as noise, as contradiction, as error. This is where people ask, isn't that lonely? Yes, at first, because there's no map, no applause, no script, but there's also no leash. You're not anti-system, you're post-system, and systems don't fail because they're attacked. They fail because reality evolves beyond the assumptions they were built on. You didn't break their machine.